She shut the door. Just like that. The sound of the latch clicking was louder than the thunder rolling across the sky. I was lying in the mud, my leg bent at a sick angle, rain soaking through my clothes until I could hardly tell where my body ended and the storm began. I called her name once, just once. I wasn't going to beg. My voice cracked against the wind. She glanced back, eyes cold, lips pressed together, and said the words that still burn through me like acid. You've always been so independent. This isn't just another story. It's a confession, a wound, and a revenge you won't forget. Don't miss a second because every detail matters. Then she turned her back and the door closed with a sharp slam that seemed to echo through my bones. For a moment I stared at the wooden frame, watching the faint flicker of yellow light inside, safe and warm, while I lay outside in the freezing dark. My teeth rattled. My broken leg pulsed like fire. The betrayal cut deeper than the pain. But even then, especially then, I didn't cry. I stayed calm. I reminded myself I had one advantage she didn't know about. A secret tucked away, invisible in that moment, but enough to make me hold on. It was past midnight. I remember because the church bell on the other side of town had just finished striking 12 when the accident happened. I had been walking home from the small grocery store. My arms were heavy with 2 bags filled with nothing fancy, just bread, milk, a small packet of sugar. The rain had started suddenly, pounding against the cracked sidewalks. I slipped when my shoe caught the edge of a broken curb. The fall was quick but brutal. I felt the crack in my leg before I even hit the ground. The sound was sharp, unforgettable. My groceries scattered into the gutter, the paper bags dissolving under the rain. The carton of milk split open, white streams mixing with dirty water as it rushed toward the drain. I remember the smell, wet concrete, mud, and that sour sting of spoiled milk. The storm swallowed me whole, and for a brief second I thought I might actually pass out. That's when I saw her. My mother. Standing in the doorway of her house, just a few steps away, framed by the golden light of the living room lamp. She wasn't startled, wasn't concerned. She just looked at me as though I had become an inconvenience, a shadow on her doorstep. "Help me," I managed, my voice strangled by the rain. She didn't move. Her hand rested on the doorframe, fingers tapping like she was impatient. And then she said it, the line that has haunted me ever since. "You've always been so independent." It wasn't just a dismissal. It was a verdict. As I lay there, shivering and drenched, flashes of our past ran through my mind. She had always been quick to remind me I was on my own. "You'll figure it out," she'd say whenever I asked for advice. "You've always managed without anyone." At 16, when I begged her to help with my college forms, she refused, saying she was too tired. When I married too young, she washed her hands of it, claiming it was my choice, my mistake to bear. Independence wasn't praise in her mouth. It was punishment. And now here she was, proving her point one final time. But I wasn't as helpless as she thought. I had something she didn't expect. Stubbornness. A memory of survival. And yes, a plan I had been keeping in the back of my mind for years. It wasn't fully formed yet, not sharp enough to use, but the seed was there. The storm watered it. Her betrayal gave it roots. The rain kept falling harder. My breath came in ragged bursts. I tried to push myself upright, but my legs screamed in protest. Pain shot up my side, nearly knocking me out. For a terrifying moment, I thought I might die right there in front of her closed door. But then headlights flickered at the corner. A neighbor's car crawled down the street, wipers squeaking against the windshield. I flattened myself against the ground, pretending to be half-conscious. Not for sympathy, I didn't want the wrong kind of attention. Instead, I wanted her to see something. I wanted her to watch another pair of eyes glance my way, hesitate, then keep driving. I wanted her to realize how invisible I had become. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? For me to vanish from her world. Still, as the car disappeared into the storm, I smiled through the pain. She thought she was teaching me a lesson by turning her back. She had no idea she was only sharpening me, hardening me into something she would one day regret. Minutes passed like hours. The storm drowned out every sound except the throbbing of my leg. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, followed by the sharp slam of a trash can lid blown by the wind. Small details stuck with me like tiny nails, pinning the memory into place. The way the water pooled around my hands, icy and relentless. The way the porch light flickered once, then steadied as if mocking me. Inside the house, I caught glimpses through the curtain. She sat down in her chair, sipping from a mug as if her daughter wasn't lying in the street. The casual cruelty of it sent a chill deeper than the rain ever could. Finally, I forced myself to crawl, dragging my broken body inch by inch toward the side of the house. My hands dug into the mud. Every movement was agony, but I moved silently, making sure she didn't hear me. He thought I had given up. She thought she had silenced me. But I was still there. Watching. Planning. Waiting. By the time I reached the side of the house, the church bell struck 1. My clothes clung to me like ice, but my mind was burning hot with clarity. I leaned against the wall, breath heavy, heart pounding. My body wanted rest, but my soul wanted revenge. And that's when I saw it, the detail that kept me alive that night. The basement window. A thin crack of light seeped from inside. It wasn't locked. It never had been. I didn't go in. Not then. But I saw it. I marked it. That was my hidden advantage. She didn't know I knew. I can still hear the echo of her words. Independent. She thought it meant powerless, forsaken. To me it meant something else. Unstoppable. That night, as the storm swallowed me whole, I made myself a promise. If she could look at me broken and bleeding and still shut me out, then she no longer deserved the title of mother. And one day I would make her understand what it feels like to beg for help and be denied. I held on to that thought as the rain washed over me as I dragged myself into the shadows, unseen. I carried it like a flame tucked deep in my chest where no storm could reach. When the first sliver of dawn cut through the clouds, I was still awake, still burning with quiet fury. My leg was useless, my body wrecked, but my spirit, stronger than ever. And I knew without doubt this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that morning. Even when the rain slowed and the sun finally stretched pale fingers across the horizon, my eyes stayed open, swollen from the storm but sharp with anger. My leg throbbed, my body ached, but my mind was restless. I had crawled into the shadows and hidden myself away, refusing to be seen crawling back to her door. I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me beg a second time. That decision was the first stone in the wall I began to build around my heart. A wall that would take 2 years to finish. The hospital came later. A kind stranger found me slumped at the edge of the alley after dawn, half-conscious, filthy from the mud. They called for help and I was carried away without her ever knowing. Or perhaps she knew and simply chose not to ask. That thought stung worse than the broken bone. Recovery was long. Months of surgeries, physiotherapy, and learning how to balance on crutches. Each time the doctor told me to push through the pain, I thought of her face at the door. Her indifference fueled every step I forced myself to take. My body healed slower than my heart, but the anger made sure I never gave up. The limp never fully left me though. Every uneven step was a reminder. Of her, of that night, of what I swore would never be forgiven. Neighbors sometimes asked after her, careful with their tone as if they knew something wasn't right. "Have you visited your mother lately?" Mrs. Collins from next door would ask while trimming her roses. I'd pretend to be busy tying my groceries into the basket of my walker. "No, not lately," I'd say, keeping my voice clipped and light. I trained myself to shut down any thread of conversation that touched her name. It wasn't hard. After a while, silence became natural, like breathing. I knew people wondered, but I also knew none of them would dare pry too deeply. That was the power of silence. It closes doors faster than words ever could. Nights were the hardest. I would lie in bed, the pain in my leg keeping me awake, listening to the creak of the house as the wind shifted against the windows. The storm replayed in my mind again and again. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. I imagined every detail like it was still happening. The click of the lock, the flicker of her porch light, the way her voice cut through the downpour. "You've always been so independent." Each repetition dulled my grief and sharpened my resolve. Slowly I stopped crying over it. Instead I began to plan. I kept a small notebook by my bed. It didn't look like much, just an old grocery pad with faded lines. But in it, I wrote pieces of my anger, little reminders of the life I wanted beyond her shadow. Notes like, "Never forgive. Never explain. Silence is stronger than shouting. Her regret will find her one day." At first, these notes were just fragments, scraps of thought that spilled out when I couldn't sleep. But over time they became something else. Rules. A personal doctrine that shaped how I lived. I didn't seek reconciliation. I didn't try to soften. I chose to become harder, sharper. My silence wasn't emptiness. It was training. Still, the world around me didn't stop turning. Bills had to be paid. Groceries had to be bought. My limp made every errand slower, but it also forced me to notice things I had once ignored. The way people glanced at me in pity, the way they whispered assumptions when they thought I couldn't hear. One afternoon I caught two women in the pharmacy whispering after I passed. "She lives alone now," one said. "No one visits her," the other replied. "Not even her mother." They said it like gossip, not tragedy. But I held my head higher as I walked out. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Silence was my weapon, then their whispers were proof it was working. There were temptations, of course. Times when I almost reached for the phone, almost dialed her number. Once, late at night, I even picked up the receiver and held it to my ear, listening to the empty dial tone. My thumb hovered over the numbers. But I stopped myself. If I called her, she'd win. She'd get to believe I still needed her, that she could choose when to let me in. But I would never give her that power again. So I placed the phone back down, slowly, deliberately, like setting a trap I knew she would one day walk into. The seasons changed. I marked them not by holidays or birthdays but by small milestones. The first winter I shoveled snow on my own, despite my limp. The first spring I planted flowers in the front yard and watched them bloom without anyone else's help. The first summer I hosted a dinner for my neighbors, laughing louder than I had in years, showing the world that my silence was not weakness. It was strength. Each small act hardened me further. Each step, each choice built another layer to the wall around my heart. But silence didn't mean forgetting. No, I remembered her every day. Not with tears but with calculation. I started noticing small things about the house across the street. Her curtains drawn at odd hours, the way her porch light flickered late at night, the shadows of visitors who didn't stay long. I never asked her about them. I never crossed the street. But I observed. Carefully. Quietly. Because if there's one thing silence teaches you, it's how to listen. And I was listening more closely than she ever knew. 2 years slipped by this way, each day strengthening the promise I made to myself that night in the storm. By then my heart felt less like flesh and more like stone. I could speak to others, laugh, even smile, but the core of me was cold, reserved, untouchable. She had built that in me brick by brick, with every abandonment, every word of dismissal, every locked door. He thought she had cut me off forever. What she didn't realize was that in her silence, I had found my power. And deep down I knew one day she would come back. They always come back. The first hint came in a letter. Not a heartfelt apology, no. Just a short note slipped under my door asking if I was well. The handwriting was shaky, almost hesitant. I didn't open it right away. I left it sitting on the counter for weeks, unopened, like a dead fly I didn't bother sweeping away. When I finally slit the envelope, the words were short and hollow. "I was thinking of you. Hope you're okay. Maybe we can talk." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a lazy olive branch thrown at my feet. I burned it in the sink, watching the flames curl the paper until nothing but ash remained. That was when I knew for certain. She would knock on my door again one day. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually. And when that day came, I would be ready. My silence wasn't just survival anymore. It was strategy. It was revenge waiting to unfold. And when that day came, I would be ready. The words had barely settled in my chest when it happened. A sound that sliced through the quiet of the evening, sharp and deliberate. 3 knocks. Firm. Too steady to belong to a stranger. For a moment I froze in my chair. My hand tightened around the mug of tea I had been sipping, the warmth bleeding into my fingers as if it belonged to someone else's body. The steam curled up, soft and innocent, but inside me a storm began to churn. I knew that knock. It was early autumn. The sun had set, leaving behind the last smear of orange across the sky. My curtains were drawn, but a sliver of light from the street lamp stretched across the floor, thin as a blade. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the wall clock and the faint hiss of the kettle cooling on the stove. Then came the second knock. Slower this time, as though whoever stood outside expected me to hesitate. And they were right, I did. My body remained still, but inside, my heart rattled like a loose hinge. I set the mug down on the table, carefully, silently, not daring to make the slightest sound. The ceramic clinked against the wood and I winced. Another knock. This one softer, almost pleading. I thought of the letter. The one I had burned. Its ash still lay buried in the soil of my garden, mixed with the roots of the flowers I had planted. I had buried her words long before she arrived at my door, and yet here she was, flesh and bone, pressing her presence into my silence. I didn't move. Not yet. I wanted to see how long she would stand there. The knock shifted again, turning from steady taps into a rhythm that trembled with impatience. Then her voice followed, muffled by the wood but unmistakable. "Please. Open up. It's me." The sound made my chest tighten, but not from longing. From recognition. From memory. That voice was the same one that had once said, "You've always been so independent," before shutting me into the storm. And now it was outside asking permission. I rose from the chair slowly, my bad leg dragging slightly against the floor. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, like crossing an invisible battlefield. The floorboards creaked, but I didn't care anymore. Let her hear me. Let her know I was there. I stopped just shy of the door, close enough to hear her breath on the other side. It was uneven, carrying a quiver I had never heard from her before. "Please," she whispered again, her knuckles brushing the wood. "I just want to talk." The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. As if words could stitch together the wound she had carved into me. I stayed quiet, my hand hovering just above the doorknob, not touching it. My silence was deliberate, a pause long enough to draw sweat from her skin. She knocked again, but this time it was weaker. "I know you're there," she said. "I saw the light on." Her voice cracked just slightly and it startled me. She had never allowed herself to sound fragile before. Not once in my entire life. That tiny fracture in her tone lit something inside me, not sympathy but power. For the first time she wasn't in control. I thought back to all the times she had watched me struggle and said nothing. The scraped knees she ignored, the broken marriage she dismissed, the storm that nearly killed me. She had built her life on my silence. But now the roles were reversed. I leaned forward, pressing my ear to the wood, savoring each uneven breath she took. She shifted her weight, her shoes scuffing against the porch. I could picture her, older, tired, clutching something in her hands. Flowers maybe. Or another useless note. She knocked once more, softer than before, like a child testing boundaries. I shouldn't have said what I did. I know that now. For a split second, the words pricked at me, the faintest hint of an apology. But then I caught the way she phrased it. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Just "I shouldn't have said it." An excuse, not remorse. And that was when I knew she hadn't come to heal. She had come to unburden herself. A breeze shifted outside, carrying the faint smell of damp leaves through the thin cracks in the frame. It mingled with the scent of her perfume, faint but familiar, sneaking into my home like an unwelcome memory. I stayed still, but inside my mind began to work. She wanted to talk, let her talk. If she wanted forgiveness, let her beg. My silence was my strongest weapon, and I wasn't about to set it down. From somewhere down the street, a dog barked, then quieted. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to make a choice. I didn't. I let her stew in the quiet. She tried again. Louder this time. "I know I've made mistakes. But you're my daughter. You can't just shut me out forever." The irony nearly choked me. The same woman who had shut her own door in my face, now standing outside mine, begging for entry. I whispered to myself words she couldn't hear. "Watch me." My hand brushed against the doorknob again, not to turn it, but to feel the cool metal under my fingers. A reminder that the choice was mine now. For once I had the power to decide. The knocking grew uneven. Desperation had a rhythm, and hers was clumsy, panicked. She shifted tactics, her voice breaking into something softer. "I just want to see your face. Just once. Please." Her plea fell flat against the wood, but inside me it rippled. I wanted to swing the door open, not to embrace her, but to let her see the woman she had created. The one hardened by silence, sharpened by neglect. To let her see the scars she had given me, and the strength I had built without her. But I didn't. Not yet. A neighbor's porch light flicked on across the street. I glanced through the thin gap in my curtain and saw Mr. Jensen step out with his dog, glancing in our direction. For a heartbeat I wondered if he'd come over, if he'd intervene. But he didn't. He tugged the leash and walked the other way. That was the difference between now and 2 years ago. Back then, a stranger's glance had felt like abandonment. Now it was freedom. This was my battle, mine alone. Her voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "I don't have much time left. I just want to make things right. The words hung in the air, thick with implication. Was it illness? Guilt? She didn't say. He never explained. Always speaking in riddles, always leaving me to fill the blanks. I leaned closer, my lips nearly brushing the wood, and breathed in her desperation. It smelled like old perfume mixed with fear. I still said nothing. Minutes dragged by. The knocking slowed. Her voice faltered. At last there was silence on her side of the door. I thought she had left, but then I heard it. A sound so small it almost escaped me. Sniffle. A shaky breath. The sound of her crying. For a moment my body wavered. Not out of pity but out of shock. She had never cried in front of me before. She had always been the strong one, the unmovable one. And now here she was breaking apart on my porch. I pressed my hand harder against the wood, steadying myself. Because this was only the beginning. I didn't move from my place at the door. My palm pressed flat against the wood, steadying myself while her muffled cries seeped through the cracks. They were faint at first, uneven little gasps, but soon they grew louder, ragged sobs that scraped against the silence of the street. For years I had wondered what it would look like to see her vulnerable. I used to imagine it as a child, her arms finally opening, her voice trembling with care instead of criticism. But standing there in the dark, hearing her unravel on my porch, I felt nothing close to comfort. What I felt was power. She shifted on the other side of the door. I could hear the creak of the porch boards as she sank down, her back sliding against the frame. The sound of fabric brushing wood told me she had settled on the step, maybe pulling her knees close to her chest the way I used to when storms frightened me. But no storm thundered above us now. The only storm left was inside me. "Why won't you answer?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just want a chance." The words trailed off, snagged on her sobs. I didn't reply. I let the silence answer for me. From my window I tilted the curtain just slightly. A thin strip of orange from the street lamp lit her shape. She was hunched forward, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling in a way I'd never seen before. In her lap sat a bundle of flowers, lilies, white and already drooping. Their petals sagged under the night air, heavy and limp, like they had been cut days ago. She clutched them tight as though squeezing them hard enough might keep them alive. But it didn't. Nothing she held on to lasted. Not my father, not her friendships, not me. Her tears spilled into the night, and I studied her the way she once studied me, with cold distance. Each tremor of her shoulders was a mirror of the years I had spent trembling alone, waiting for comfort that never came. My body ached to open the door, not from forgiveness but from the urge to confront. To let her see the daughter she had created, scarred and limping but unbroken. To watch the shock flood her face when she realized the silence she had taught me had now become her prison. But I didn't move. Not yet. A rustle broke the air. She pulled something from her coat pocket, an envelope. Even from behind the curtain I recognized her neat, looping handwriting. She slid it under the crack of the door, the paper scraping faintly against the floor. "I wrote it down," she murmured. "Maybe you'll read it if you won't listen." Her voice wavered, thick with tears. I stared at the envelope on the floor. The urge to kick it back out nearly consumed me. Instead I bent slowly, my leg protesting, and picked it up with 2 fingers like it was something poisonous. I didn't open it. I set it on the table, far from me, its presence heavy in the room. Her sobbing quieted after that. Not because she was calm but because exhaustion was pulling at her. I could hear the slow drag of her breath, uneven and shallow. Every so often she muttered to herself, broken fragments of sentences that slipped past the door. I thought I had more time. She doesn't understand. I should have. The words blurred, swallowed by her despair. I leaned my head against the doorframe, closing my eyes for just a second. Her voice, so small and cracked, didn't stir pity. It stirred memory. I remembered nights as a child when I had cried in the dark, begging for her to sit beside me, to reassure me that monsters weren't real. She never came. She always said, "You'll get over it. You're strong enough." Now she was the one in the dark, whimpering, shaking, waiting for someone to soothe her. And no one came. A car passed slowly down the street. Its headlights washed over the porch for a moment, and I saw her face illuminated. Her makeup had smeared, lines of black trailing down her cheeks. Her eyes were red, swollen, desperate. For the first time in my life she looked small. The car kept going and the street sank back into stillness. Inside me something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness. Never that. It was clarity. For years I had wondered if she even had the capacity to feel remorse. Watching her now, I knew she did. But remorse wasn't enough. It wouldn't erase the night she left me in the storm. It wouldn't stitch back the countless cracks she had carved into me. It was too late. Her flowers slipped from her lap, tumbling onto the porch. The petals scattered, some sticking wet against the wood, others catching in the breeze. She bent forward, reaching for them with trembling hands, but they crumbled under her fingers. A low, broken sob escaped her lips as the bouquet collapsed completely. The sight of it nearly made me laugh. She had brought flowers as if they could fix years of abandonment. As if a gesture wilted and weak could undo a lifetime of silence. I turned away from the curtain, letting her cry in the night. Minutes passed, though they felt longer. My body grew stiff from standing so still. The clock ticked on the wall behind me, each sound hammering into the quiet. I thought she might give up, walk away, leave me to my peace. But she stayed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered hoarsely. "I just don't want to die with this between us." Her words clung to the air like smoke. Die. I repeated the word in my head. Was that why she was here? Was that why her voice carried such urgency? She hadn't come for me. She had come for herself. The realization pressed into me like ice. She wasn't here because she cared about what I had suffered. She was here because her own guilt had become unbearable. This was about her peace, her absolution. She wanted me to heal her conscience. But what about me? Who had ever come to heal mine? The silence in me thickened, heavy and deliberate. I moved closer to the door, just enough that my shadow spilled across the crack of light. I let her see it. She gasped softly on the other side, realizing I was standing right there, listening. "Please," she said again, her palms pressing flat against the door. "Just one word. Just one." I lifted my hand, placed it over hers through the wood. My skin burned at the contact, though no touch truly connected us. For a moment she sighed with relief, thinking I was about to let her in. But I didn't. I pulled my hand away. Her gasp cracked like glass. She broke then. Fully. Her sobs turned to wails, raw and unrestrained. She begged, words tumbling over each other, desperate and incoherent. She pounded once against the door, then again, her fists weak but frantic. "Don't do this to me. Don't leave me out here like this." The irony seared through me. Every word was an echo of my own past, every plea a reflection of what I had once shouted in the storm. But unlike her, I wasn't cruel. I wasn't closing the door. I was simply not opening it. At last her fists fell still. The sobbing slowed into hiccups, then into silence. I peeked through the curtain once more. She was slumped on the step, her head buried in her arms, her body shaking. And I watched her. I watched the woman who had taught me silence finally crumble beneath it. For the first time in years I felt taller, stronger, unshakable. My scars didn't weaken me, they crowned me. And as I stood there, staring at her broken figure, I knew this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Revenge. And it was only getting started. I stood there, watching her crumble on my porch, her body shaking as though the weight of her own regrets had finally crushed her. She rocked back and forth, whispering fragments I couldn't make out, her voice breaking under the strain. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet flowers, and her perfume turned sour from sweat and tears. I didn't move. I let the silence settle deeper, pressing in around us both, until even her sobs seemed swallowed by it. And then finally she lifted her head. Her eyes searched the window, desperate, red-rimmed and swollen. For the first time in my life I saw fear in her gaze. Not anger, not coldness, not pride. Fear. "You're really not going to answer, are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't. The words tasted sweet in her mouth, even if she didn't realize it. This was the same silence she had once given me. Cold, dismissive, final. And now it was hers. She wiped her face with trembling hands, smearing black streaks across her cheeks. Her breath came out in jagged bursts, and when she finally spoke again, it was softer, more fragile. "I don't have long," she murmured. "The doctor says it could be months. Maybe less." There was the truth. The reason for her sudden return. The illness she hadn't spoken of directly, only hinted at in her rambling. I felt no shock. Deep down I had already known. Her urgency wasn't about me. It was about her fear of dying alone, her guilt rotting inside her like a second disease. And she wanted me to cure it. I almost laughed. She had come for my forgiveness the way a thief comes for gold. Demanding, expecting, desperate. But forgiveness was not mine to give. Not anymore. She coughed, her thin shoulders shaking. The sound echoed in the night, brittle as glass. She bent forward, gripping the porch railing to steady herself. I don't want to leave this world with you hating me, she said, her words tumbling out fast, urgent. I know I failed you. I know I was cruel. I thought if I kept you strong you'd never need anyone. I thought that was love. Love. The word stung my ears. Was it love when she closed the door on me, bleeding in the storm? Was it love when she turned every cry for help into a lecture about independence? No. It was pride, selfishness, cowardice dressed up as strength. And now she wanted to rewrite it. I pressed my hand against the glass of the window, just enough to leave a faint outline she couldn't see. My heart pounded hard in my chest, but I stayed still. Silent. Because the truth was she didn't want forgiveness, she wanted release. And giving her that would mean sacrificing the only justice I had left. Her knocking slowed, then stopped. She lowered herself onto the step again, her arms wrapped tight around her chest. For a long moment, the only sounds were the crickets in the grass and the ticking of my clock inside. The world moved on, ordinary and uncaring, while she withered on my porch. Finally, she pulled the second envelope from her coat pocket. Her hands shook as she laid it on the step beside the ruined flowers. If you don't want to see me, she whispered, just read this. Please. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't touch the envelope. I let it sit there, a pale square against the dark wood, soaking in the damp air until the edges curled. She wanted me to open the door, to reach for her words, to meet her halfway. But she had never once done that for me. And I wasn't going to start now. The night stretched on. Her body slumped further, her breaths shallow. I thought she might sleep there, right on my porch, waiting for me like a penitent at the gates. But then she stirred. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upright, bracing against the railing. She wobbled, unsteady, her strength fading. For a moment she lingered, staring at the door as though she could will it to open. It didn't. Her lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Then, with a final shaky breath, she turned and staggered down the steps. I didn't follow. I didn't open the door. I didn't call after her. I simply watched through the curtain as her figure shrank into the night, bent and small beneath the street lamp's glow. Her shadow stretched long and thin, like it was being pulled away from her body, like it already belonged to the dark. And when she disappeared from sight, I exhaled, slow, steady, controlled. The silence she left behind was louder than any scream. I turned back to the table. The first envelope she had slid under my door sat there, untouched. The second one lay abandoned outside. For a long time I stared at them, my fingers twitching with the temptation to open at least one. But then I remembered the storm. The broken leg. The slam of her door. And I knew, her words could never undo her actions. I took the envelope from the table, carried it to the sink and struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, dissolved into ash. Through the window I saw the second envelope still on the step, damp and ruined. Tomorrow I would sweep it away with the flowers. Let the rain take them both. As the flames died in the sink, I felt something shift inside me. Not emptiness, not sorrow. Something cleaner. Lighter. For years, I had carried her silence like a stone in my chest. But tonight, by giving it back to her, I had set it down. She left me in the storm once. Tonight, I left her in the dark. And in doing so, I finally stepped free. I limped back to the door, pressing my forehead lightly against the wood. I whispered softly, words only I could hear. You wanted me strong. Well, here I am. The house was still. My heart was calm. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because she had changed. Not because she had apologized. But because I had one. My silence had been louder than her pleas. The clock struck midnight. A new day. A new life. I closed the curtain tight, turned off the lamp and let the darkness hold me, not as an enemy but as an ally. Because I had survived her. I had defeated her. And she would never break me again. My silence was my revenge, and it echoed louder than any words she would never hear. If this story shook you the way it shook me, subscribe now. I have many more dark, emotional revenge stories that will keep you thinking long after the video ends.